Thanks very much, Rachel, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. So the INSYTE Cooley Laboratory is a part of the INSYTE Centre for Information Systems and Technoculture that's been around for about 20 years now. We've had a PhD program running since 2003, and we have some taught masters there as well. And back in 2016, I think we started formally looking at how we can engage with the area of cultural heritage. We were mindful of the UNESCO imperatives around tangible and intangible digital culture, and we were also looking at some technologies that we felt could really be applied there. We started working with the librarians, in particular the archivists at Waterford, where there's a lot of very important nationally and international collections. And then this year, just gone, in 2020, we formally launched the Cooley Lab, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. So why is it the Cooley Lab? You're wondering, I'm sure, what that's about. So, well, Mike Cooley, for those of you who don't know him, was probably the most important systems scientist and systems engineer to have ever come out of Ireland, certainly in the last century. He would be the most important. He was also a very strong social advocate. He was, and picking up from Angelique's themes there from her talk, he was a pioneer in human-centered systems and human-machine symbiosis. He was very strong and promoted the idea of a technologically enabled society which was inclusive and which overcame marginalization. And he was very critical of a lot of the way in which automation and AI, including AI, was being rolled out, and a lot of the discourse around that. And he was the first winner of the Alternative Nobel Prize as well. So really a towering figure for us. We received the Cooley collection from the Cooley family. He passed away there a year or two ago. And we received that 5 years ago, and that's really a major momentum energizer for us as we move forward with this. So we exist then, the Cooley Laboratory, to honor Mike Cooley's legacy, and everything that we do has some grounding in that legacy. And for those of you not familiar with him, there's two key books. He wrote an awful lot, but there were two key books: Architecture B, written in the 1980s, and also a more recent text published 2 years ago, Delinquent Genius, which is a remarkable text, it draws on themes in Irish literature as well as in system science and automation technology. So that's what we're about. The context of the Cooley Lab is to create an environment in which we can co-evolve in a human-centered systems approach, new technologies which we want to wrap around the archivists who we work with, and also scholars who want to work with the special collections that we house there and other special collections. And so to look at how AI and related technologies can support the archival process. And when, in the very early days of starting into this work, it was very clear that there were anxieties around this. One anxiety that was articulated was, well, if we invite all this technology into our lives, Larry, are you going to automate us away? And and that's a power issue. You know, who has the power in this process? So we, which is something Andrew touched on earlier in a very powerful way, I felt. So mindful of these issues, we launched out in a program based around the work of people like Claudia Chabora, who talk about technology as a guest rather than something that is foisted on people. So that there was some of the things that were there, and to try and allay some of the nervousness that might be there around the technology. So our first task then in the last 5 years, in the first strategic period, was to survey the technology. And we said, okay, well, what's out there in terms of some technology that we can deploy in this space, technical issues. And my presentation, by the way, really is focusing on technological imperatives. Jennifer is going to come along and give you a sense of, from a humanities perspective, what's going on over there, or what's going on in that space within the Cooley Lab, and I'll come back to that later. So one of the things we focused in on was interoperability. There's a massive issue, and Andrew touched on it, around enabling us to access the various digitized and digital objects that are out there, and creating a platform or some capability by which we can work with these digital objects in some kind of coherent way. And there's a real issue of access. A lot of it has to do with formatting, but it also has to do with the content of what's in the metadata too. So we were looking at those data standards, and we also were looking at digitization techniques. At the laboratory, we have a researcher, Patrick McInerney, who's also a lecturer in digitization and creative computing. And Patrick works a lot with with our postgrads as well, in looking at that technology, and we're very interested in what data that technology can generate and how that might fit into our the knowledge base that we want to create, and the sort of the digital architecture that we want to develop in support of the archivists. We were looking, and we continue to investigate machine intelligence applications. Most of our focus has been on semantic solutions. So looking at how can we enable a machine to read conceptually what these objects might mean, and in this way to create a kind of or support the creation of narratives. Because one of the issues that came up real early on, I remember this very clearly. One day we were in the Cooley Lab, which is actually in the digitization hub in the library, where on the special collections floor. And I was working. We were in the lab, and Peggy, who's one of our leading people, one of the leading archivists and curators of these collections, she opened up one of the collections, and I remember sitting with her and seeing how she engaged with the collection. And one of the things that really hit home for me was how she understood almost intuitively and was able to draw out of the collection. And the particular collection that she was working with was something called the Graves Collection, which is a collection of records of the Graves Shipping Company, which operated out of Waterford Port, and in the 19th century, and was central to the mass immigration of Irish to Canada. And her appreciation of the story arc and what this collection means to the Irish people, to the story of the communities in the southeast of Ireland, was really extraordinary, really struck home for me. And one of the issues that is clear, and you see this in Mike Cooley's work, as well as some of my own publications and others, is a real poor understanding around what from in the computing community of tacit knowledge, and how these archives have cultural importance in their storytelling ability and in the engagement of the stories and the experiences of people. And that can get lost in the technology development process. So we wanted to see, how do we address that? I'll come back to that later. And in all of that, we want to create an architecture which would allow, which would be a living architecture. In other words, we would be possible to plug things on it and evolve this architecture, because we were clear we wanted to create a co-evolutionary process for the technology, a co-creation process for the technology, not just, here's some really nice flashy tech and then shove it into the archival process. So some key messages then. One key message for us was, well, there's some great tech out there, and as a computer scientist, sure, that's great, right? We love that, but it doesn't fit comfortably together. And there's a legacy issue, particularly around metadata standards, but in other areas too, it was hard for archivists to get in a systematic way to get real value from the all the different technology. Then this is where the real problem starts to arise, and Angelique has already touched on this. So we've surveyed the tech, wonderful, lovely stuff. Then we said, right, well, how do we build this system in a way that valorizes human creativity, the capacity of archivists and other people to engage with these archives and help us to understand their meaning and what the stories they're telling, and the methodologies for developing the technology and the technical infrastructure, and even understanding the requirements was just pure ropey, okay, for want of a better word. In particular, very little appreciation for the interplay between human and machine intelligence. And we have noticed that there's actually a poor understanding on both sides of the coin, both on the digital side from technologists of what humans bring to knowledge work, and also from the other side, what machines can do and what they can't do. And in particular, tacit knowledge, very undervalued knowledge that Peggy and Kieran, the archivists that work with us, bring to the way that they engage, even emotionally, with these really important collections. So we had to reinvent the wheel a little bit. And so we were so animated around this that we started rethinking fundamentally what did systems development mean in a process like this. And Brenda O'Neill, one of our senior researchers, and she's studying her for her PhD in the lab at the moment, she came up with a systems development manifesto. And we've just brought that manifesto to the International Federation of Automation and Control president. So we really want to enact change here. And let's say it's, which is what we're kind of after, I suppose. From the manifesto, then, we were able to identify some key principles for development. We've called this Enricher, and both of these, we have papers on each of these which have been published. And now we also identified the need to revise the standards, revisit those standards because they're just not fit for the purposes that we're looking at. And then from a technical point of view, all the flashy tech, well, we want to integrate our solution better into what we would call the knowledge management process, or the curating process, and look at other areas of machine intelligence, and also look at UX, the user experience. So what's our North Star in all of this then? Well, where are we headed? Well, to name a few things, we really want to have a kind of an integrated approach to the digital cultural heritage value chain, we'll call it that, but there's better terms for it than that, but to look at how that whole process happens, and also how can we improve that process to make it better and more centered around what archivists actually do, and also what do scholars and other people do who are engaged with these archives, as well as those people who donate archives, whether they're born digital or not, to like the families of people who donate these to our special collection. From a technical, we want to deliver the architecture and expand the tech beyond semantics, looking at process intelligence. We're looking particularly at fuzzy cognitive mapping at the moment, integrating into knowledge graphs. We're also using Apache Gen at the moment to deal with those API issues that Angelique looked at. We have projects running on that, and to show some leadership on the standard side. Methodologically, we need to operationalize and refine Enricher and make it more the technology as guest, rather than technology being pushed out into people who may or may not want that technology. But particularly looking at, we've got a project at the moment looking at how do we quality assure what we do. We also see the lab as a participative action research process, and that's key to our human-centered vision for systems development as a co-evolutionary process. Most important of all, we have begun expanding into and expanding our activities in the space of digital humanities, because as we've got a really good handle on what we can achieve with the tech and with the development processes and with the engagement with the archivists and understanding what all of that means, we can achieve a couple of things. We can more deeply integrate it into the education process, the lab itself, and beyond our computing students, but bringing in others. But much more important is to start leveraging the insights from the lab to deal with digital culture and how it can marginalize people. So we have a project running on called the Human Ballast Project, Human Ballast 2022 with Canada, in which we're going to explore what's in those archives, and then what are the implications of those narratives and stories, for example, of the immigration of Irish people to Canada and key drivers in that. And what are the implications of that, and what do they tell us about the role of AI society today? And we've got projects running as well in the whole area of diversity inclusion. We've a strong research unit within INSYTE in that, and we've integrated that now into the lab that's led by Mary Doyle Kent. It's one of the engineering team. But looking at digital culture at the margins, so we have, and Jennifer will talk about this in her talk in a moment, but we have engaged with the Magdalene laundries and those really harrowing archives and the stories that are in there. We have just completed a project. We're just writing up the papers at the moment working with LGBTQ+ and the whole issues of digital and marginalization, which Andrew talked about earlier. And we want to expand all of that work. But one of the important things to understand about Cooley Lab is that we're a diverse group. We have PIs in business studies. Dr. John Organ. We have PIs in computing you've already heard about. And we have PIs we have Jennifer in the humanities. So we're a very diverse group, Mary in engineering. And we've tried to bring that together to really pull our heads together to see what solutions we can come up with that are going to work. So at least we hope so. And of course, key to all of this are the archivists and librarians, Kieran and Peggy and Terry and all of that great team there. So that's the technical and the digital kind of perspective on this. And in order to give you a balanced view of what we're doing in the Cooley Lab, I want to now introduce to you, if I may, my colleague, Dr. Jennifer O'Mahony, who will share with you her perspective on the Cooley Lab and what we're doing there. So thank you for your attention.